Good morning. About 7:15 right now on Sunday, June 8th. I just finished a new book last night. Already typed up my notes. I'm here to tell you about it. And this is one that you might want to add to your library or take a pass on. So, listen to what I have to say. Either tell me I'm full of shit or say, hey, thank you for your knowledge, and we'll go from there. But I'm just going to jump right into it. We have here a book called A Book Without a Name. Okay? And it is a short story anthology with tons of different authors that are on here. Okay? Now, what's happening here is the book itself, it's decently, it's 250 pages. So it's a pretty fast read for people like me to go through there. I love the sizes of these kind of books, these trade formats. They just fit really well while reading. I'm a big fan of getting books of this format. So this was published only about 2 years ago by a man named Benjamin Blankenship. And I think it was by April of 2022 that this came out. So it was post-pandemic. And he put together this collection of short stories and even some works, poems, and such in the public domain to kind of give you, the Western horror, the splatter horror, or other kind of Southern Gothics together in like one tome. So it's like a one-stop shop for things of this kind of genre and things that you can get into. The stories themselves, I think the longest one is like 43 pages, going down to about maybe 8. All the poems and sonnets are only 1 page, but like it's a big mix between you're getting a really short story to getting just a short story. But it doesn't take away from the content of what's in these stories. You can write a fantastic 8-page book, or you can write a shitty 100-page book. It's up to your talent to tell the world what it is. So, all told, there are 23 sections to this book. Okay? And of the 23 sections in the book, it is 9 of them are public domain. They're mainly 1-page poems like a sonnet from Shakespeare or one from Mark Twain or something from William Blake, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. There is a 9-pager that's from H.P. Lovecraft story called The Music of Eric Zahn. So right there you've got, 23, and less than half of them are these, but then the rest become the stories themselves. Okay? Self-published by Benjamin Blankenship. He actually gets, because he wanted to write, have this story put out there, he has his own short stories he wanted to tell as well. So there could be the whole impetus for this was he had some short stories, but if he did them, it would be like less than 100 pages. So let's compile some other ones and get something that can actually be sold to the public. And there you go. So now, of the 23 stories in here, Blankenship himself has about 7 of them and takes about more than a quarter of the book itself. So actually, between his own work in the self-publishing and the public domain stuff, that's like a third of the book. But again, it doesn't take away from the other 8 or 9 stories that are in here. Nor to say that he's taking away from stories he's also sharing. So, I don't have much to say about this. I mean, I kind of went through it. I was excited to read it because I'm actually getting into this splatter western genre. And this was coming up as a like book. So I was like, all right, let me give it a shot and see how it is. I have my stack of splatter westerns back here right now. It was on the top of it, but because the actual size of this is a little bit larger, it was kind of falling off the top. And I know I could have just put it on the bottom, but I was like, listen, let me just get this done for aesthetic reasons, and I'll go on to my next book and my next book, so on. So, without further ado, if I go through the stories, there are some that I just didn't get into. I mean, almost like what you would call like a meh kind of a story. So I'm just going to skip by those and talk about a few of the other ones. There are 4 that are definite out of the park ones. So I'll just concentrate on those, I guess, and then call it a day. So it starts early in the second story, which is actually the third installment because there's a Shakespeare sonnet in there, is Mawr Gorshin. It's Mawr. I'm going to say more, and if I'm wrong, I heartily apologize to Mawr Gorshin. But it has a story called Ghost Town. And it's like a perdition story. It's one where there's a man who comes back to town to find that his wife is hung and his children are dead. And you start to learn that the reason why she's dead is due to some treachery that he himself had done and just came back from. So, again, I try not to do spoilers here, but I want to give the justice to it. But it was the man in question betrayed his fellows, and now he has to pay for that sin. The story is like 17 pages long, and it does turn the pages. So, a great installment in this whole anthology. Fantastic. Moving forward, Jason Roberts has a story in here called Black Mud. Again, here's a person who got some gold from whatever nefarious thing he had done before, and now he's kind of like escaping the law, and he actually knows that there's like this Boba Fett bounty hunter after him called Diciembre, and he knows this person always kills whoever he goes for. So now he's at the end of the trail. It's very muddy. It's like a mud town, and he's like sludging through it, whatever else, and it takes you on to the rest of the story. You know, does Diciembre come up and capture him? How does he get through the mud? Does he get through with all of his stuff? Yada, yada. And this one here actually is an 18-pager. And you're in his head, his perspective the whole time. So just even trying to get through the mud, you get those problems he's facing. His horse was with him for a little bit too, and as he's cursing the horse out and whatever else. So, Black Mud, definitely a good one. I'm going to skip the next one for a second and go further on in the book, but halfway through the book, Megan Stockton has one called Dead Horse. Again, great installment in this book. Dead Horse is pretty much like there's a down and out farmer who borrowed money from a loan shark hoping he can get through the season, okay? But unfortunately, the crops failed. So now he's got nothing to sell, and he can't pay back the dude. And usually, like loan sharks, he's a bad dude. So he's got like 4 days to come up with this money. And you see him trying to work out how is he going to do this. But he's got a young daughter, like a late teenage daughter or something like that, who he lives with, you know, because the mother is dead for whatever reason, or she's gone. But she's capable. So she knows something's troubling her father. But then while the father goes away trying to come up with ways to like gamble or get the money, the loan shark visits her and says, I can get your dad out of this loan. You got to go do this, though. Because originally, he told the dad, if you can't pay in a couple days, I'm taking your daughter. And you ain't going to want to know what happens to her. So now you have both of them trying to find a way out of the loan, but they might be at cross purposes. And at the same time, aren't telling each other they know about the loan. It's a good read. Now for the one I skipped is Midnight Train to Tucson. This one's actually written by C. Derrick Miller. And C. Derrick Miller is one that actually had written Starving Zoe, which is one of the splatter westerns. I actually have a review for that in a not too long ago review here. I'll put it down in the comments below. But I mean, it's one of those like strangers on a train, and one by one, and there's like 4 of them, and one by one they start interacting, and some people don't like each other, and other people are just like, wait a minute, you're a priest, I'm a whore, We got nothing in common. What the hell are you talking to me for, kind of thing. So it really has great dialogue to actually show that this stuff is building, like as the tension gets higher and higher, and why they're on the train and where they're going. It's all part of this story. This was one of the second longest one actually in the storybook, which is 33 pages, which turns out pretty cool. Actually, I want to look at something real quick. I'm going to pause this, which I usually never do, and come right back. Okay, we're resuming right now. The reason why I paused it, I just didn't want to film it the whole way, is I was very curious if on these splatter westerns that I have here, if anyone else of those authors is in this book. And it appears that C. Derrick Miller is the only one. So this might have even been written before Starving Zoe. I don't know, but the guy's got some talent. So I might have to look for more C. Derrick Miller novels when I'm done with that whole pile of books I got somewhere over here. This over here, and then all my Dresdens down here. So that's what I'm looking forward to in the future. There are other stories in here, like I said, just not my personal favorite. Um, I'm just not going to talk about them. Sorry, I wish I had more for you. But I mean, that does leave you with another like 4 stories, maybe 5 stories that you can get into, besides the stories that Blankenship himself has put in here. Um, Unfortunately, and this is going to be a quick one today. Unfortunately, I have to now get into a negative on this because I'm getting used to these splatter westerns just having editing errors. And I'm not an editor. I don't want to be an editor. But I've talked about this a few times already, and it just keeps happening over and over again. To the point that I'm kind of like almost not as annoyed. I'm like, yeah, they do that. It's almost like when I'm in my office and if I have an employee or if I work with other people and there's an employee in the other group who's just basically worthless. When they do errors, you're like, yep, frickin' did it again. And I'm kind of at that point here. So I'll just talk about 2 or 3 of them, but it's just like, they just don't seem to have editing in their mind when they make these splatter stories. And I just don't know why. And one of the reasons why I don't know why is, like I say, if you happen to type this on something like Microsoft Word, which is a very popular word processing program, it will tell you these errors. It literally will underlie them in color. And the only way you can beat that is if you tell the program, no, this error is fine, don't worry about it. For instance, if you're doing any kind of story that has a name and the name looks just a little weird, it will underline the name. So you might say, no, that name's fine. Especially if you're doing a sci-fi thing and it's an alien race or an alien name, Gazorpagorp, you can write that down and it'll be like, boom, that's not spelled right. You say, no, that's fine. But even if you do that and you click it saying, ignore this forever, later on in your story, if you write Gazorpagorp and misspell it, it will pop up because you haven't said it was okay. So it's the most popular word processor out there that I'm aware of. It used to be Word Perfect versus Word, but then that whole Lotus suite is gone. But what am I talking about here? But a genre. I'm sorry, my notes. Really guessed me. All right. So now, the first one that really ticked me off. Okay, was one of their public domain stories. Is an H.P. Lovecraft story called the Music of Eric Zahn. Okay, I'm just now starting to get into Lovecraft. I actually put it on audio when I mow my lawn or do some housework. Not quite getting why the genre is so popular, but that could be because I'm doing some stories and not the good stories yet. But this story was actually pretty decent. I do love the violin a lot, and this guy, the person, Eric Zahn, is a violinist, so, you got me. You got that one thing that can pull my string. No pun intended. So, but it's a public domain book, because it's like over 95 years old, I think. They put it in here because it might fit the genre. But again, you're taking work that was already done in the past, that's already been edited, that's already been published, and somehow when they got it into this book, they're still misspelling words. I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't know if they're using like a dictation software or a person just reads the book and it types it down for them, and maybe there was a stutter or maybe there was just like another sound that screwed up a letter, but it's just like it's not going through any kind of proofreading whatsoever, it appears to me. I'm not saying it's not, I'm saying it appears to me. So, and like I'm saying, I shouldn't have this kind of a strong opinion about this. But I hold books up to a high standard. I just have a reverence for people who can do this and get it out there and become, especially can become successful, you know. But to err on such a basic function, it kind of gives you that, well, I guess anyone can write, so damn the rules, you know. And I see this kind of thing with like internet new media all the time. You know, new blurbs come out in like a Yahoo trending news or something like that, and you pop it up and there's constant mistyping. As if someone keeps asking every day, hey, in this job, does spelling count? You know, is this going to be on the test? Like I don't know if this is like a millennial drop the ball or just don't care attitude that comes with some younger generations. But it's like the established rules of the game, which should apply. You go against them just because those rules are old. And I don't understand it. But here's what I mean, okay? On page 170 of this book, during the H.P. Lovecraft story, at the very bottom of the first page, it talks about a man going up into a tower, you know? And the sentence itself, or the partial sentence of the bigger sentence says, consisting in several places of flights of steps. You know, so he's going up different flights of steps all the way to get to the top where Eric Zahn is playing his violin. Okay? But again, the word flights is misspelled. There's no L. It's F-F-I-G-H-T. It's for fights. And I was like, you know something? Maybe it was lifted from the source material and it was misspelled back then. Okay. But I actually went to the Project Gutenberg version of this, which is from the original text. And the Project Gutenberg has it correct. And they will they will bring forward misspellings if they're in the original text. You know? But it was originally written accurately. So how in the world did they get it wrong, bringing it into this? It's just beyond me. I don't... It's just a small, simple thing, which, like I said, and I went into very great detail in another one, it just takes you out of the reading, of the imagination of the story, the world that you're trying to dive into when you come across this. And I'll fast forward to another example. You know, the end of the book has a story called The Sandman. You know, this is the grand text that's supposed to bring you home. It's what we're ending this one on. So usually you want to start it off strong. You want your fourth story to be pretty strong too, and your last story is supposed to boom, wrap it all up saying, this is how great this book was. You're going to leave it saying, wow. For some reason, this guy who wrote the last story doesn't like apostrophes. I don't know. Oh, by the way, I say guy. I don't know the gender of the writer. But the apostrophes just kind of got away from him, you know. You come across the words when you're reading the story, and when there is an apostrophetical word there are things like an extra space between the apostrophe and the S. And then the very next page, there's a space for an apostrophe, it's just not there. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, you want to see the top of page 240. There's a person's name there, you know, and you'll see it directly. It's like there's a name. It's like Johnson's, apostrophe s, but there's the space, and then later on the very next page, it's the word it's. So it's the space is there. I don't know why it wouldn't have been caught in a very basic review. Now, independent publishing. I understand things can actually be expensive. I was listening to Brandon Sanderson's lectures online, and at the very end, he starts going into the actual, working with a publisher and the different types of edits that you need to get. And there's 5 different types of edits. And each one is a charge per word or a charge per page. And the charges can be 0.001 of a cent. But that can add up, because if you have a 30,000 page word, 30,000 word book, I cannot speak these days. Thank God when I'm doing my audio work, I can actually take my time and I know I'm recording, but this is from the cuff. I'm not reading this. When I'm doing that, what the hell was I? I just lost myself. Oh, Brandon Sanderson. So there's a whole thing where you have all the editing, the different editing costs per thing based on a style guide, punctuation and spelling, a content guide, and there's a few more. I went into this in detail in a prior one. I forgot which one it is. But there's different charges, and you're already printing this book in some fashion. You have to pay for the cover art and everything else. So yeah, those charges can actually add up. And I can understand foregoing some because you're being indie and getting out there. But the small thing hey, let me see this thing in Word, do an F7 and see what it pops up. That's all you got to do. That doesn't cost you any money. It costs you maybe 3 hours of time maximum to just proof this real quick. Again, I talk too much about this. The last thing I want to say is, a style guide. One thing that usually, when you're reading these books, mainly on a solo book versus a collection of, but you would almost like to have a certain style guide throughout, in a way, with some exceptions. So, for instance, the alignment of words on a page. Okay, there's a justify area, which is in most common books, which actually takes whatever sentence you have and flattens it out. So there's an even margin on both sides, and all the words are in between, and they looked solid down the thing. Okay, that is the most common way that books are published. Now, these kind of rules don't apply to things like poetry. For some reason, poetry and prose, if you've got your stanzas and your lines that are rhyming, you want to make sure, even though the sentence may continue on to the next line, you want to end that sentence with the rhyming word. Most, close, whatever it is. So they don't have to follow this kind of thing. And a lot of people who do poetry, sometimes they just center a line, to have this thing work. Or they left a line. But they don't follow the rules of, justification. If you don't justify your pages, a lot of times from my perspective, you left justify them, meaning all the beginnings of the sentences line up flat, and you can draw a straight line down the whole book, but the right side of it ends with whatever many letters were in the last word that fit on that line. Okay? Very common as well, can't take that away. I prefer justify, but left is good too, no problem, okay? There are sections or small stories in this, or even epistolaries within a story, that it just looks like someone was typing it, on a typewriter, and was carriaging to the next line, because maybe they thought a word wouldn't fit, so they went to the next line to make sure it doesn't go too far off to the right or off the page, and kept doing that over and over again. But when you're reading the finished product, you're like, this word ends so much earlier than the line above it, or the line ends before the line above it. You could easily have fit the next word in there, probably the next 3 words on that line, and made it all fit together. So there was I don't know how am I supposed to read this differently because of the way it's actually laid out or not? So, justification and alignment, it's not necessary. It won't take you out of the story, but I noticed it. Now here, let me go for my no prize. This is a little Marvel concept where if you found an error in Marvel Comics, but then wrote a letter to the editor showing them how the error actually might not have been an error, they gave you what was called a no prize, which my cousin, I think, did this, and his no prize was a Marvel envelope sent to him with nothing inside. I don't know if that was an error or if that was actually the prize, you know. But like I was saying before, if the epistolaries that were in the story were a person writing it out, and maybe they thought the writing wasn't going to be fitting the line and they went to the next line, that would make sense. But in other books I've read that were of that type, that writing, the cursive, was actually printed in the book. It wasn't a typed out letter. They tried to make it a cursive thing. But again, that might have cost more on the editing or whatever else. I think I'm done for this morning. So, and I am not ripping this book apart. Like I said, there's some great stories in here. Everything I say deserves to be read, but not everything deserves to be liked. And I'm a hard sell. So, on that note, pick this up if you want. Don't pick it up if you don't want. Let me know what you think, if you've read this or if you want to read this, if you think I might have done justice or swayed you or dissuaded you. But in any event, like I like to say, keep reading, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.